On this Saturday night, fire and fury in the streets of Montreal. Rioters clashed with police, denouncing the war in Gaza and NATO.
This was nothing like lawful, peaceful protest. This was anarchy.
While Canadian leaders condemned the violence. The first case of Mpox now in Canada.
Winnipeg is now the first and probably not going to be the last.
What health experts are saying about the risk to others. 6 tourists dead in a popular resort town in Laos. Was it a deadly drink that took their lives? And Taylor's Toronto finale.
I think the city has really come together. It's created such a great community.
The Swiftie fever, which has swept the city for the last 10 days.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Montrealers woke up to significant damage in parts of the city's downtown core after a late-night riot broke out fueled by anger over the war in Gaza. Pro-Palestinian and anti-NATO protests turned violent ahead of high-level NATO meetings in the city. Cars were burned, windows smashed, and at least 3 people were arrested following the chaos. Police say more arrests will come, but there is also fear of more unrest. Dan Spector has our top story tonight.
The windows of Montreal's Palais des Congrès smashed with hammers and bricks. Multiple cars set on fire as an anti-NATO pro-Palestinian demonstration degenerated into chaos on Friday night. 3 people were arrested and politicians of all stripes are condemning the violence.
What we saw was actually violence, hate, and anti-Semitism, and this has no place on our streets.
An anti-capitalist group and a pro-Palestine group organized separate marches to protest a high-level NATO meeting at the Palais des Congrès. Their goal to denounce NATO's complicity with Israel's assault on Gaza. The 2 demonstrations joined together around 6 p.m. and in the ensuing moments, fireworks were launched toward police, cars set alight, windows deliberately shattered. Riot police dispersed the crowds with pepper spray. 1 officer and 1 civilian were left with minor injuries.
This was nothing like lawful, peaceful protest. This was anarchy.
Those arrested include a 22-year-old woman who's accused of assaulting a police officer and 22 and 28-year-old men who are accused of obstructing police work. All have been released.
It's unacceptable, it's despicable, it's anti-Semitic.
One video posted on social media showed a burning effigy with Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's name written on it. On X, Prime Minister Trudeau called the violence appalling, saying anti-Semitism, intimidation, and violence must be condemned. He said there must be consequences and rioters held accountable. Montreal Mayor Valérie Plante called the violence shocking and thanked police for making arrests.
We have a lot of techniques, investigation techniques, that showing us some faces, some details, so we're going to be able to arrest more people in the next days or next weeks.
Montreal's chief of police said some of his officers were attacked, which he called intolerable. He said officers prevented an even worse outcome and that police will remain deployed in large numbers as the NATO conference continues through Monday. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
Canada's commitment to NATO is being scrutinized at the International Security Forum in Halifax. The country has long lagged behind the alliance's spending requirements. On Friday, Defense Minister Bill Blair tried to brush off that criticism, but many aren't convinced. Mercedes Stevenson has heard from some of those critics at the forum. Mercedes.
Carolyn, here at the Halifax International Security Forum, Canada's plan on defense spending is coming under intense scrutiny, especially from our allies. Right now, that plan says that Canada will get to 2% of GDP being spent on defense by 2032. But many allies here are saying that that is too little, too slowly, especially the Americans. This week on the West Block, I sit down with Republican Senator James Risch. He is a powerful Republican who sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He says that Donald Trump is not likely to be impressed by Canada's current plan. How critical, Senator Risch, do you think this issue is going to be with the Trump administration?
Really critical. He's been very critical of all of the allies who weren't stepping up. When he took office, there were only 3 of the 30 NATO countries that were making 2%. He was very tough on them, as you know, and now we're up to just a handful that aren't.
As these conversations continue to unfold at the forum, we'll sit down with Canada's Chief of the Defence Staff, General Jenny Carignan, in her first sit-down interview since assuming the role. Carolyn?
Mercedes Stevenson in Halifax, thank you. And you can watch more of Mercedes' conversation with Senator Risch and General Carignan tomorrow morning as she hosts the West Block from Halifax, airing right here on Global. Senator Risch has also stirred controversy at the Security Forum. Yesterday, he was questioned over Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense, who believes men and women should not serve together in combat. Risch said women created unique situations, and the jury is still out on tackling that. Canada's top soldier spoke out today with her take on those comments.
I can't believe that in 2024, we still have to justify the contribution of women to their defense and to their service.
General Carignan also says she did not want anyone to leave the forum with the idea that women are a distraction to defense and national security, and that those in uniform fighting need to be recognized. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, who has openly questioned the value of NATO, met with the head of the alliance yesterday. Secretary General Mark Rutte visited Trump at his residence in Palm Beach, Florida, where the pair discussed a range of global security issues. Trump has complained about the defense spending of member nations and has even threatened to withdraw the U.S. from the alliance. At the UN's annual climate summit, countries agreed today to create a new global market for trading carbon credits. It's seen as a way of helping fund more projects to fight climate change. But there was far less progress on the key question of cash from wealthy countries going to help developing nations get off fossil fuels. Representatives of the world's developing nations walked away disappointed after rich countries finally agreed to provide $300 billion. Experts estimate it will require 3 times that amount for developing countries, the ones least responsible for causing climate change, to move away from polluting sources of energy. In the Middle East, Israeli airstrikes in central Beirut and its suburbs have left at least 20 people dead. Huge plumes of smoke could be seen over the area today as the overnight attacks lingered into the morning. The strikes are said to have begun without warning around 4 a.m. and destroyed at least one 8-story building in central Beirut's heavily populated Basta district. Israel claims to have been targeting a Hezbollah commander. Explosions also rocked parts of Gaza today, with this video showing the moment dozens were sent running from a strike on a camp of displaced people southwest of Gaza City. The Hamas-run health ministry says at least 120 Palestinians have been killed and more than 200 injured over the past 48 hours. Nearly a year after the Canadian government set up a temporary visa program for those with loved ones in Gaza, fewer than 500 applications have been fully processed. Amnesty International says the program is deeply flawed, and now 2 Canadian Palestinians who have lost loved ones in Gaza are suing the Canadian government for not doing more to help. Heather Yourex-West explains.
We are giving everything we have to push for our loved ones' evacuation, and it has left us empty.
After more than a year, much of Omar's family remains in Gaza. Suffering from breast cancer, his sister Rasha has no access to treatment and little hope.
I'm still asking that my family stranded in Gaza, under the continuous threat of losing their lives at any moment, be treated with the same urgency, the same humanity that Canada extended to others.
Since it was launched last December, Canada's temporary residence program for Gaza residents with family in Canada has been plagued with problems. There have been no government-assisted evacuations out of Gaza, and fewer than 500 visas granted to those able to pay their way out of the region on their own.
Even as relentless bombardment continues, is a tragedy and prompts a chilling question. Was this program deliberately designed to fail?
It's why Amnesty International is calling on Ottawa to make immediate improvements to the program by eliminating barriers they say were not required to those fleeing Ukraine in 2022.
Palestinian Canadians matter, and we are human beings.
Tamara Gerada is taking the Canadian government to court after losing several family members in an Israeli airstrike last October and struggling to bring his surviving family members to safety. Girard has become one of 2 plaintiffs in a suit against Ottawa. Dimitri Lascaris is one of 7 lawyers handling the pro bono case.
At this point, we're seeking simply a declaration. We want the court's acknowledgement that Canada is violating the Genocide Convention and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Ottawa says its ultimate priority with the visa program is the health and safety of Canadians, while also working to keep families together, and will not comment on the lawsuit that is now before the court. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky took part in annual commemorations today, remembering the millions who died from a Soviet-made famine known as Holodomor. Zelensky joined a poignant procession in Kyiv, which marched to the site of a victims' memorial. The tragedy was also remembered here in Canada with Toronto's Ukrainian community. The Holodomor famine was forced upon Ukrainians during the early 1930s by Joseph Stalin's Soviet regime. It's estimated to have killed at least 3.9 million people, but historians believe the true death toll is even greater. The first case of a variant of the Mpox virus, formerly known as monkeypox, has been confirmed in Canada. The infected person recently returned to Manitoba from Central and Eastern Africa and is now being monitored. Richard Zussman reports.
For months, clade 1 Mpox has been spreading in the Democratic Republic of Congo and other parts of Africa, a public health emergency of international concern. Now it's here in Canada.
The unfortunate reality is, we knew that we were going to see cases likely at some point in Canada. Obviously, Winnipeg is now the first and probably not going to be the last.
Canadian public health officials are releasing limited information on this case. The individual was diagnosed shortly after returning to Manitoba from Africa and is currently isolating. Public health is contact tracing. Symptoms include a painful rash, swollen lymph nodes, and fever. Transmission typically requires close contact with someone showing symptoms, including sexual activity, caregiving, and contact with contaminated materials like bedding or towels. Severe cases can occur, but most people recover fully.
Data suggests that hopefully that this will be self-resolving, and then we just have to continue to monitor for any contacts.
Health experts say the last major outbreak of Mpox in Canada was in 2022. It was a different strain, leading to nearly 1,500 confirmed cases. The overall risk now to the general population remains low.
The same rules apply. Low barriers to identify cases, ensure people have the ability to isolate at home, ensure people have appropriate medical care.
Last week, the first American case this year was identified in California. Vaccines are available in Canada for those at highest risk, but the priority remains getting vaccine to the Democratic Republic of Congo.
This is difficult, right? You have internal regulations, you have international regulations, but surely we could do better than dithering for a couple of years before we actually start to see needles going into arms.
Dr. Isaac Bogosh adding, when you let something brew, it will mushroom. And seeing cases exported out of the area is the outcome. Richard Zussman, Global News, Victoria.
Putting food on the table is costing more than ever. Coming up, how Trump's re-election may be driving up those grocery store bills. The federal government has announced it's providing $45 million in compensation to Inuit living in Nunavik, northern Quebec, for the slaughter of sled dogs decades ago. Canada's Crown Indigenous Relations Minister traveled to the region today to issue the apology. Sled dogs were the main method of transportation for Inuit for generations, allowing them to hunt, fish, and move from camp to camp. But in the 50s and 60s, Quebec and federal agents like the RCMP killed thousands of dogs to force Inuit to settle in one place.
When the dogs were killed, it impacted the way of life in a severe way. First and foremost, it took the self-determination out of Inuit. Essentially disabling them from being self-sustainable.
The Quebec government apologized for their part in the cull back in 2011 with a $3 million contribution to protecting Inuit language and culture. In 2019, the federal government apologized to Inuit living in Nunavut for the role federal forces played in killing sled dogs there. Food inflation remains a persistent problem in Canada, even though overall inflation is trending down. And economists are warning shoppers that higher prices at grocery stores are likely to stick around. As Anne Gaviola reports, the incoming president of the U.S. has something to do with it.
President-elect Trump's decisive victory in the U.S. and the Republican sweep of Congress boosted stock markets, cryptocurrency, and the U.S. dollar. Call it the Trump bump.
Donald Trump's policies tend to be a little more pro-growth oriented, or a little more stimulus is coming down the pipe, especially in the form of tax cuts, and even planned deportations in the U.S. could put some upward pressure on wages.
Many of Trump's election promises, slapping sizable tariffs on everything coming into the U.S. and mass deportations, mean higher inflation, which will require higher interest rates. That's propped up the greenback against many currencies, including our loonie. And economists expect that to continue to fuel food inflation. There's also a seasonal aspect to it.
Food costs will tend to rise a little faster towards the end of the year, especially ahead of the holiday season, because people tend to eat more at that time. They celebrate more, certainly, with friends and family.
And this time of year, we import more fresh food as Canada produces less. A weaker dollar means that will cost more.
Grocery prices, we know, have outpaced headline inflation.
There are things you can do to manage your grocery bill. Personal finance expert Rubina Ahmed-Haq recommends meal planning and taking stock of what you have, then creating a shopping list. Cutting down on food waste is key.
When you throw things out, that is really throwing money in the garbage.
Another tip for managing food inflation that's likely to continue: use apps and flyers to comparison shop and consider where you shop.
If there is a discount grocery store in your neighborhood, consider shopping there first before going to the one that has the more bells and whistles but is more expensive.
Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, how did 6 tourists end up dead after consuming drinks at a hostel in Laos? We'll explore that next. The government of Laos in Southeast Asia is vowing to track the source of a suspected mass alcohol poisoning in a resort town popular with backpackers. At least 6 tourists are dead after consuming drinks that appear to have been laced with methanol. As Bianca Faccini reports, tourists are being warned to stay on alert.
Tourists from all over the world now being much more careful in Laos.
Scary, because not everyday people are dying. Just like this.
The Southeast Asian country, popular with backpackers, is grappling with the death of 6 tourists following a suspected methanol poisoning.
It's poison and cannot be consumed. It causes swelling of the brain and caused the death.
The government said Saturday it was profoundly saddened over the deaths, adding investigations are ongoing to bring the perpetrators to justice in accordance with the law. Police say suspects have been detained but have not detailed how many. The victims include 2 teenagers from Australia, identified in Australian media as 19-year-olds Bianca Jones and Holly Bowles.
This is every parent's very worst fear and a nightmare that no one should have to endure. All Australians offer them our deepest sympathy in this time of heartbreak.
James Hudson, a 57-year-old American man, also died in the incident. This week, U.S. and Canadian governments issued health warnings, urging travelers to be aware of the potential for methanol poisoning. Other victims include 2 women from Denmark and 1 woman from the U.K. As the investigation goes on, businesses that rely on tourism are on edge.
There have been quite a few cancellations. It's obviously just a really bad situation. But as I say, hopefully it is a one-off.
The Nana Backpacker Hostel, where the 2 Australian victims were staying, closed its doors to new customers Saturday. Bianca Faccini, Global News, Washington.
Next, swift exit. The hottest ticket in Toronto wraps up on a high note. The Prime Minister shaking it off alongside his family last night at one of Taylor Swift's final concerts in Toronto. It's been 10 days of Swiftie fever in the city as the pop megastar performed 6 concerts at the Rogers Centre. The last one is tonight before the tour heads to Vancouver, where it will close out early next month. Sean O'Shea reports on the finale and the fandemonium.
Taylor Swift fans at her tailgate party before her final show here, where even if you don't have a ticket, you get some of the experience. This is the next best thing.
That is. That's why we're here, so they can have a little bit of Taylor.
Her daughter and her friend making memories.
I love it here.
Toronto has been all Taylor for 2 weeks. Signs of the pop star everywhere you go.
Positive karma, positive energy. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
From makeup so you could look like Taylor to the silent disco at the old subway car where fans can sing along. A city embracing the hottest live act in the world.
It's been chaotic, but really amazing.
Taylor Swift's fans came from near and far to see her, in some cases spending not once, but multiple times to get their hands on expensive tickets.
We paid, yes, in excess of 20 grand.
That's $20,000. Along the way, duped into buying fake tickets. You got scammed.
2 times.
A surprise gift for her neighbor and her daughter.
There was like actually something in me that knew it was going to be this, and like now we're here and I'm really happy about it.
And they're hoping these tickets for the show are valid.
So now we're on our 3rd set of tickets.
Do you actually have the tickets with you?
Yeah, we do. But we had them before too, and then all of a sudden they became invalid.
For others who can't get tickets at any cost, fans talk about the camaraderie around the star they love.
I think the city has like really come together. It's created such a great community.
And for everything negative in the news these days, Taylor Swift offers a respite.
You know, you forget about it for 3 hours watching her show, but the memories stay with you forever.
Sean O'Shea, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is the Alnwick Haldimand Township Hall in Grafton, Ontario. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow.